And this session is called Get It, Got It, Good, Enhancing Your Scored Labs. And in order to enhance your scored labs, that means that we're going to be talking about scored labs as they exist and what you can do to modify those scored labs and make them a little bit more interesting or a little bit more revealing about people's capabilities and knowledge. My name is Brian Bork, and I am a senior technical readiness trainer with Learn on Demand Systems. And I am joined today by several of my coworkers. You can see that we've got both Ryan and James here. Ryan is here primarily as a support mechanism. So if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat. This is much more of a demonstration style lab. So if we could keep the microphones and cameras clear until we get to the point where we're asking for questions and so on. Go ahead and type your question in chat and we will try to answer it. Or Ryan will let me know that there's a question and I'll try to address it. And James is here because he knows this product better than anyone. So when the tough questions come up, he is going to answer them and I am going to go away and hide because that's what I always do. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Of course, as always, you can post and win if you take a picture with or without you in it. Post it on LinkedIn, Twitter, and or Facebook, and announce that you're attending Launch Q2 and that you're having an awesome time or anything like that. And make sure to tag Learn on Demand Systems. The tags are along the bottom of the slide here. LinkedIn, Learn on Demand Systems, Twitter at LOD Systems, and Facebook at Learn on Demand Systems. We will take a few of our favorite posts and we will select them and get them listed as our gift card winners, and you'll be notified via email. All right. Today's agenda. We're going to take a look at defining a scored lab and what a scored lab is. It just is a lab that has scoring turned on, but it's a lot more than that too. So we're going to take a look at what it is. Then we're going to talk about the additions that we have for scored labs. In other words, how can we enhance the scored lab? How can we make a lab that has not just scoring, but also has the has relevance and has importance to not only the ultimate score and results that we get, but also to the test taker and or lab user. Then we're going to talk about how you implement those things. Implementing means actually going in and doing inside of Lab on Demand. So what is a scored lab for the purposes of this discussion? A scored lab is a Lab on Demand feature that allows you to question knowledge or script checks, and I'm putting air quotes up there, to ensure that learners are either gaining knowledge or proving skills. There are two primary types of methods of this feature. One is using questions, either multiple choice or fill in blank or the blank. And the second is automated activities, which are scripting submitted to various lab platforms. For example, you can submit things differently to the cloud than you can to a local virtual machine or a container. Depending on the lab platform, you can submit checks. Now, that's what we think of, but it isn't just those things. You can put questions into your lab without actually having a score associated with it. So scoring is actually a turning on of a switch, but in addition to that, it means so much more. When you are self-evaluating or when you're following a example in a lab, you are mostly along for the ride. You're not necessarily actively participating. By throwing in activities, even without turning scoring on, you are improving the interactivity, but you're still sort of along for the ride. So when you throw scoring into the mix, that's when you start really challenging learners. Now, scoring is evaluated at the end of a lab. And even though some of the things we're going to be talking about can be done while you're in the lab or while you're in the exam, we're talking primarily about something where you get a result at the end, and it's typically a numeric answer. Did I get X out of Y? The concept that you have to approach when you're talking about scoring a lab is, what do I need to do? What do I need to prove that this person is capable of doing a specific task or a set of tasks or exercises? So you have a scored lab, meaning that you've turned on the little slider button that says, I want to score my lab. So you maybe have a few questions, maybe you have a script that checks whether a lab user has completed a task either in the cloud or maybe on a virtual machine or something like that. But now, what could you add to that? What improves the performance of a scored lab? Well, how about considering weighted questions? Giving a score value to your scored items. In other words, not just giving somebody a single point for answering a correct question. And when we talk about weighted questions, we're also going to talk about those in the context of partial scores with what we call multiple choice, multiple answer. Then there's the periodic on-demand evaluations. Now, this is sort of one of those questions you have to ask yourself. Do I want an end user to be able to check how they're doing before they get to the end and I actually tally up the score? In other words, do I give them the ability to self-check before I check to see that everything is complete? And then consider adding activities that don't check the status of things, but actually change the environment. And we'll use the word that, or the phrase that you may have heard this morning during the keynote, and you will hear again, and that is the chaos monkey. And throwing the chaos monkey into your environment will allow you to do a lot of different things, and we'll talk about some of those. And then randomization, grouping, and outcomes. Now, I do want to talk about those because those features really do add value, but I have an entire session coming up tomorrow afternoon called Exploring Activity-Based Assessment Outcomes, where we start and we talk about randomization and grouping, but then we focus on outcomes and how outcomes work. So that is tomorrow from 12:45 till 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. I'd love to see you there. We'll go into much more detail about this. But what does randomness, grouping, and outcomes actually give us? It gives us the ability to dynamically, I don't want to say deviate, but divert questions or particular activities or things like that based on certain answers or certain mistakes or certain groups of choices. For example, you could give a group of questions, and then if those questions were answered correctly, if that group was answered correctly, then you move them to a next harder group. Or you could give them a random question from a random level. Let's just say it was from an intermediate level. You give them a random question, and then if they get that question correct, they go to a slightly harder random question. The whole concept of putting randomization, grouping, and outcomes into play is it's so diverse that that's why it requires its own session. So we're going to talk about the first three in this session. So weighted scoring. I want you to consider this because weighted scoring allows you to determine a score value for any scored item. By the default, every item that you create that's scored and is going to be scored, and you check a box that says it will be scored, is starts off with a value of 1. And when we have that value of 1, that means that every question is just as important as every other question, to an extent. let's say, for instance, that you have 10 questions and you need somebody to get 7 of those questions correct. You are assuming that all 10 of those questions are of the exact same importance. But what if one of those questions is more important or proves more or has more quote unquote value? Then you give that a higher score weight. And so let's say we have 10 questions and we give a value of 2 or 3 to a particularly important question. You want to make sure that somebody gets this question correct. All right, that one really needs to be correct. And so we're going to give it a higher value. But then you also have to take into account the whole complexity of if this question is part of a group or if this question is random. Maybe they don't get that question, so maybe they're not going to be able to get the highest score. And so maybe they won't get enough points to be able to make up for not getting that question correct. So you never want to put a question so valuable that it's the whole reason for the exam, unless that's the whole thing. Can you get this question correct? In which case, then it doesn't really need a bigger score value. It just is a 1, and that's the only question you ask. But if you're putting questions in a series of questions, consider your weighting of those questions. Okay. And again, we'll be showing each of these as an example. On-demand evaluation. Now, on-demand evaluations are typically not scored. So in a lot of cases, you will have an activity that checks to see if somebody has done everything up till now, and then a different activity, which will check to see whether they've done everything at the end. So you can put these in place at different locations and give people sort of a check my status as I go to see whether or not I'm on the right path. That doesn't mean that you can't have a scored lab. Giving somebody the ability to self-evaluate or self-check is really good at building up confidence or helping somebody learn as they're doing. Giving them a score at the end is really just sort of the icing on the cake. The whole point of this is to help educate them as they go, as opposed to testing knowledge. So when you're scoring labs, as opposed to creating a performance-based test for an exam, a lot of times you're scoring a lab based on the various activities that are complete and did they actually learn as they went and complete all the activities. But the end user don't necessarily know until they click on that submit and it's too late whether or not they have been doing things correctly. So if you want to help educate them using a scored lab, and then you get the results at the end for your, your evaluation purposes, you can give them a self-check as they go along. So on-demand evaluation, typically not scored. You get to name the button, which means evaluate, check my work, score, just check. Whatever it is that you want to put in there, you get to name the button. And I think that's important because the words that you use for that button will help the user understand that you're not submitting for scoring at this point, you're just checking as you go. And then, do you want to allow retries? Now, this is one of those things where you start getting into, is this an exam? Is it high stakes? Is it low stakes? And all of the other things that we talk about when we talk about challenge-centric learning. But it's important to consider whether or not you want somebody to fail forward and fail fast and fail forward, or if you want to check to see whether they know what they're doing. So is this an assessment or is this an exercise? That's really what you're asking yourself. If it's an exercise, you should certainly allow retries. If it's an assessment, maybe you don't allow retries. You get one check to see if you're on track for what you're supposed to do. And if you're not, well, you're going to have to figure out what it is, because you can't come back in and check here. Maybe we'll check again later to see if you've gotten a little bit further along. Allowing retries is very commonly done when you're educating and not commonly done when you're assessing or testing. Adding activities that don't check work. And I wish I could take credit for coming up with the monkey. I think that we need to get some wild colors in there to make it a true chaos monkey. But the whole concept of the chaos monkey, if you don't know and if you haven't heard it, is the concept of I'm going to do something to your lab or your exam or whatever you're going to, whatever scored lab you're using. I'm going to do something to it. You're not going to know what it is, and then you're going to have to fix it. Or you have done something to your lab. I'm going to undo, then the user is the chaos monkey, and I am going to undo this and reset this back. This is an activity that you put in that either breaks or fixes things. So the whole break fix thing is not the only reason for the chaos monkey. The chaos monkey might be used, for example, to put multiple possible exams into one single lab profile. Think about it. You could test somebody on whether or not they knew how to do networking repair, or you could test to see whether or not they knew how to install a piece of software, and you could use the exact same virtual machine, the exact same lab profile, and using the chaos monkey, you can throw it at them and they won't know what they were going to get. Now, if they do it enough times, they might get the same thing over and over, but using chaos monkey can really impact a lab. So a lot of times you'll see, here's your lab profile, or here's your scored lab. You're going along, you're doing a bunch of stuff, and you've got it set up right. And you do a check and you say, yep, everything's set up right. And then there's a button that says, click here to proceed, and then it breaks the lab. And now when they click on next, their whole purpose is to figure out what was broken. Now, when you put that activity in and you put that button in for the activity, now you have altered the lab interface, but you can also have variables that keep track of how you altered the lab interface, so that when you check it at the end to see whether or not they've done and score them, you score them based on whether or not they were able to fix the break that was randomly done. Once again, this is just a single example of what you could do with the chaos monkey. There are limitless possibilities. But it is truly a concept of it. Just because you have a scored lab, even as an exam, you don't necessarily have to do, you're going to do this, then you're going to do that, then you're going to do that, and now we're going to check to see what's going on. We can throw randomness in. We can throw in a button that allows them to have activities that are complete, and then essentially break them or fix them after they are broken. I don't know, maybe in a cybersecurity, for instance, you might have them break a lab, and then they run the chaos monkey to see if that can randomly fix things, and then that makes it that much harder for them to break it again. There's just it. Every time I think about it, I come up with another thing that I can think of that I would potentially use an automated activity in the middle of a scored lab. All right, so let's try out some of these, and we're going to use very, very basic examples, but we use those because it's important for us to make sure that we've got a clear idea of how you put these in play. This is not about how we put in complex cloud scripts and so on. This is about how you do things to add value to a scored lab. So let's bring up an example. 1 second here. There it is. I was looking at my screen, and all right, here we go. I've got the Lab on Demand interface in the background, but here is, I call it my scoring sampler. And the reason I call it that is because it has all of the examples of things that we've talked about. This is just the introduction here, but here is the example of single answers and multiple answers. Once again, this is our, you have a scored lab, let's enhance it. Now, these are all doing self-checks, right? You can see here, this one says score, this one says check. This one says check, and that one says check. So we have these abilities, but what we're really getting at is we are going to the concept of adding scoring and score weights and things like that. So here is an example of using scripts to validate an activity. How many icons appear on the desktop, and then we can say here and check. There we go. And then create a file called test.txt. Now I'm going to pull one over and I'm going to have it check my file. This is that on-demand evaluation that we talked about as part of a way of adding value or adding additions to a lab, is by putting in this self-evaluation. But let me go ahead and edit these instructions. I'll resize my screen a little bit so that we can see them. And let's go into our activities. Now, here is that slide checkbox I was telling you about, that add scoring. And here are the ways of, now, so you see here, some of these are considered practice, and some of these have a score value. The practice ones, a lot of them in here, typically are the ones that are going to have activities associated with them that modify or change. So for example, how many icons appear on the desktop? Should that be a practice? No, that should be an actual scored value. So how many icons appear on this? How do I make it a score? Well, I check this box and then this score value comes up. This is where we get into weighting questions. Now, it may not make much sense to make this question have a significant weight, but let's do that. So let's throw this completely out of whack, and let's say that this is 4. The score value is 4. That's how important this question is. Now, if we were saying, we're generating a random number and you need to be able to count that number, or we need you to go in and look at a file to see if this value is correct, and that is really, really important, then making it a higher value is a good idea. But making it too high of a value, like I'm doing here, can skew things to the point where if you get this one wrong, there's not enough points to make up for it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And you'll notice now my passing score hasn't changed, but my total score has. So in order for my total score to be more up there in line with what I want, is 70% or 80%, maybe I'm going to put this as 7 out of 9. Well, in that case, they have to get this one right in order to get 7 points. Oh, yes, because they're only going to display 2 of these multiple choice single answers here from this group. So I would get 4 from this if they got those right. And I would get 1 from this, which gives me 5, but I need a 7. So if they get this question wrong, they're pretty much over. Now, if that question is that important, maybe it's a good idea just to make that the question. That's the only thing that you need. Just put it in there, have them answer it, don't check it, and then click on submit and say, all right, here you go. All right. So that one was rated a little high. I could probably put that one back down to 1. But creating a file on the desktop called test.txt, that should be important. But I can't really test that question or at that point, because that point is actually a text in the instructions. So I have to test the automated activity that checks to see whether or not that file has been created. So let's go and back into our instructions, scroll down, and we're saying here, checks to see whether or not the file has been created. Let's go ahead and put a score on that. And there you go. It is now going to be scored. But wait, this doesn't let me give this a score value or a weight. Yes, it does. It's just down in the scripts. Now, if you run multiple scripts, each script will have its own weight. So if you run multiple scripts to check to see if multiple things have been done, each one of those can have its own score weight, which will then apply if that script check is okay. So if my score value here is now 2 or 4, now we're making this actual exercise much more important than the multiple choice question. So you had to get the exercise right, or you had to get every single multiple choice question correct. So you begin to see how tying together the weight and groups and things like that, the value or the score value, excuse me, of an individual question is very, very important. And it's a great addition. You can just leave everything 1 point, figure out 70%, and say, all right, if you get 70%, you pretty much understand what's going on. Or you can start making things a little bit more valuable or a little less valuable as you go. So we talked about how you can use activities to do the check of the environment, but what about that chaos monkey? What about that having an activity that does things to change the environment? So here is a lab. Here's a virtual machine. That virtual machine has a set of icons on the desktop. Well, if I click this button, now that desktop is going to get more files put on it, a random number of files, and it is truly a random number. I can actually populate again because this allows retries. And now it just added an additional file. But now this environment has changed. So before we were testing to see whether somebody put a file called test.txt on, but now we have put a random number, randomly named files on the desktop. We could do things like, say, as we have here in the question, how many, using number of text documents are on the desktop. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to put the answer and check. And it's going to go through and look for the number of text documents. Hey, look at that. I got it right. But if I run this again to populate, to put another random number on, and I answer the question 4 again, you'll see maybe this isn't so right. Okay. But this is what I was talking about before, where you could have this activity in a scored lab where you're not checking your work as you go and just say, look, can you get this right? Or maybe instead of checking for the number, you would say, is one of the log files named 79747? Or what is the name of, the 5th file, or whatever. There's all sorts of possibilities that you can do based on, and this may not seem like it's too chaosy, but it is a randomization. It is putting a random element in and making it more challenging to the end user. All right. Here's an example of changing up the environment. Now, remember how I said that the chaos monkey might be used to give you multiple labs or multiple exams or multiple possible exams from a single lab profile. Here's sort of an example of that. This is changing the language here from English to Spanish. And notice that it says what you put something in here. And then all of the instructions have switched over. You could do this with programming languages and have different code appear. You could do this with, excuse me 1 second, I have to clear my throat. There, you got to watch me cough instead of listen to me cough in that case. But imagine if you did this with, not just by changing the dropdown, you didn't just change the language here, but you also changed the question that it asked. There's all sorts of possibilities of what you could do here. So let me just switch this back to English here. So I'm going to put in bacon. And now watch, because I put this in, now it's going to go ahead and it's going to put something on the desktop, I hope. I did click on it, didn't I? Oh, there we go. I must have misclicked. But it's going to put something on the desktop, and it now is based on input that I put inside of here, or something that I did inside of my instructions or my question. Now I've got my favorite food, and then when I go inside, it's actually got my response in there. So now I can actually change the desktop, not just the instructions, but the desktop based on activities that are located in the example. There are tons more exercises and examples that I would love to show you, but right now it's time to go back to the slides. As always, if you want to learn more about challenge-centric learning using scored labs, you can check out lods.one/PBT and scoring, all one word, no spaces. And that's Paul Baker Tammy. I'm pretty sure I didn't get any of the actual phonetic alphabet in there. So that's always a goal of mine. So that's PBT and scoring. Please complete the session evaluation. You can either find it as the last activity inside of the class that you came to from the TMS, or there will be a link in our chat, and that just popped up now. Please make sure you fill that out. It's really valuable for us to evaluate what's working and what isn't working. What you learn new and what you may have gotten some repeats of things that you already knew. Keep up this chat going on Slack, labauthor.slack.com. You may have to register, but if you register, you will get access, and we will be happy to communicate all of, not just our team, but your peers are out there contributing ideas and giving ideas and showing ideas of what they have worked on. You can submit your feature ideas, and you should submit your feature ideas at lods.one/feedback. And we have weekly demos at lods.one/feature demos. That's plural with an S, no space, one word. And if you want to check out all of our events and maybe get access to some of the old content or anything that's upcoming, you can check it out at lods.1/webinars. One last piece of advice, and that is, it is really important for you to know that you are not alone. If you are stuck and you're having difficulty creating your own challenge-centric learning, coming up with chaos monkeys that might, help challenge your users, or you don't know how to best ask questions, or you're not quite sure even what learning objectives you're trying to determine with your lab or your exam, we have a team called the Professional Services Team standing by to be able to help you out. We've got the technology, the people, the process, and the expertise to be able, to be able to help you get your learning locked in. Whether it's high stakes or low stakes assessments, badging, certification, we have that covered. Our experts can build robust hands-on scored labs or labs with assessments. If you aren't even necessarily thinking, well, I know how I want to test my users, we can help you even determine that. Work with our team to learn, and you will hopefully learn best practices, or we can help you by developing for you. Last but not least, the product feedback. It is very important to us. The portal is there. We've already talked about how you can get to it. Make sure you submit your ideas at lods.one/feedback. And we hold this every launch, and it's really important. So get it while it's hot. Review us on G2 and get up to $25. No, not up to. Get $25. Submit a review of the Learn on Demand Systems team at G2, and we will email you a $25 gift card to the vendor of your choice. What you do is you go out and submit a review at lods.one/review us. Take a screenshot and email it to events@learnondemandsystems.com. Tell us in that email how you would like your $25, what sort of gift card you would like, and we will send the gift card via email. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. We only have a few minutes left before the end of our session, but I'll open it up for questions, and I will say thanks for attending.